we always play repeats of almost all of our programs, so you're not going to miss much, because whilst they are a continuation of our dialogue, it's certainly not something that you need to feel bad about missing, because in the company of Professor Munasinghe, you'll realize in the next 2 minutes you're not going to miss much. So you will enjoy tonight's program, even if you have missed last time's program. But as I said, if you visit our Facebook page, you'll be able to follow the progress of how you can catch up on what you've lost. Now, Professor Munasinghe, as those of you who are joining us from last week will remember, is the only Sri Lankan Nobel laureate. He shared the Nobel Prize in 2007 with several others, including the then US Vice President Al Gore, and he's also authored several publications. In fact, you'll see some of us that we'll be referring to, more than 90 authored or co-authored publications. He's won several awards and recognitions. He holds several degrees, starts with a BA and MA from Cambridge, postgraduate studies at MIT, PhD in McGill with a concurrent MA in economics. So he's both right and left brain, so to speak. And as I said, he is Sri Lanka's pride and joy, and only Sri Lankan to be a Nobel laureate, and he is in our company on Checkmate, and I hope you make the maximum of his company and learn all that the man has to share with his countrymen. Professor, when we left last week, we were at that point where you left the World Bank. You were at possibly the next step would have been a vice president, but you left it and you came to Sri Lanka. Now, even whilst you were abroad, you always tried to have that atmosphere or homely Sri Lankan cultural atmosphere at home, even with your children. In fact, you said that was one of the reasons for you to come back. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, we talked earlier about my involvement in science and physics and all the Western attributes. But actually, one of the things we were very keen was to give our children roots, and we imposed a rule that we talk only in Sinhala at home, which was quite difficult. But our children, although they have been born and bred abroad, are very fluent in Sinhala, and in fact very much at home in Sri Lanka. As I said, every 8 years or so, we used to come back. I came back to Sri Lanka. I took a break for 3, sometimes 4 years with the children. It was a collective family decision, and they never said, look, we want to stay back in the States or anything. They always wanted to come back whenever they could. So I think that's a tribute to Sri Lanka.
Talk to us a little bit about those other areas that you always try to get involved in whilst being in the midst of your busy everyday life, like your meditation and your...
Well, for the last 40 or 50 years, I've been meditating every day for 30 minutes. And I do my round of Tai Chi and Tibetan exercises and so on every day. And these are all, I mean, one's children and now one's grandchildren also observe this. So when you say, when you show admiration and fondness for Sri Lanka and Eastern values, you're also demonstrating in a real way that it is a true thing. So the children recognize that there is an element of sincerity.
Isn't that funny for a scientist? I mean, you're a man who's won the Nobel Prize, and you've gone the length and breadth of the science world, and here you are exploring the realms of the mind, if you like. Perhaps one were to say that which has not been proven by science or even bordering on religion. How is that combination? How did you come about with this?
Yeah. Now, very quickly, it's this. If you study quantum physics, it is very different from classical physics. That you recognize that the world is not solid particles, ganatva as they say in Sinhala, in the Buddhist lexicon. It is waves, and this is recognized in the principles of Buddhism, in Anitya, which basically says that there is no solidity. It is all an illusion. It is all a question of waves. And that is exactly what quantum physics says. So just because you're a physicist does not mean that you cannot make the link with spirituality. And there is the other aspect, the anatta part, that Buddhism teaches you that there is no self. And the word used is Swang-yojanaya or Sakkaya Ditthiya, which is a self-view. And that is the modern view of consciousness. From the scientific perspective, it's very close to that, because it basically says a person, a conscious self, is what is known as a self-referential loop. It is a loop of information which bootstraps itself and thinks it's an individual, and puts a symbol on saying, you are Chrismal, I am Mohan, and so on and so forth. So what the Buddha did through just thinking and rational analysis and through a process of vision is very close to what science and physics are telling us.
Quick pop question before I go to a quick break, because you got to get on to our next segment. Are you then a spiritual man more than a scientist, or are you a scientist more than a spiritual man?
Both. I think you need the balance. Like the Sustainable Development Triangle, you need a balance in all things.
There you go. He bats well, as you will also note. He's also a sportsman, been a great tennis player, represented Sri Lanka at the Davis Cup. We'll be back in the company of Professor Mohan Munasinghe after a very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back. We are in the company of Professor Mohan Munasinghe, another guest in the elite panel of Checkmate guests, one of Sri Lanka's best, in fact Sri Lanka's only Nobel laureate. As you know, Checkmate strives, our production team strives to bring and takes meticulous care in picking our guests, and that's perhaps the success of Checkmate, as my production team informs me. And a bit of news, as we always do on these programs. Checkmate, as you know, has been with you for a while now, and from the responses that we've been getting, particularly from the younger generations who appear to have caught on with the ethos of Checkmate, who want to learn, who want to emulate these persons who come on board, has made the Checkmate team think that a Checkmate forum may be possibly a good idea. Now that would be a forum made up of all our guests. If you visit our Facebook page, you will see the caliber of the Sri Lankans who have visited us, who have been our guests. There are those ones who in their respective fields of expertise, who have gone the length and breadth and have lots to share with you. And so a Checkmate forum is very much in the offing, and we will be hosting that very soon. So do write in to us with your queries on all these areas of all our guests who have been with us, and we will act as a medium, as your medium, to channel your thoughts, your issues, your questions to them, and we'll provide you answers via the same medium. Now, Professor, when we left, we've on the last day, you've come to Sri Lanka twice and thrice. You worked, and at various intervals, at various times, you've come and worked with regimes of the day. So you're one of those individuals who've always managed to work with whatever regime and give back to the country your professional expertise. We've had discussions of your past interactions, possibly an overview of some of your more recent interactions with Sri Lanka as you've been coming.
Well, as you quite rightly put it, I've served every government of Sri Lanka since the 1980s as a sort of senior advisor. And it's usually to the Ministry of Energy or the Ministry of Environment and so on and so forth. And what I've noticed over the years is that the problems of Sri Lanka have become more complex, but I'm afraid the technical expertise and the governance has not kept pace. So we need to urgently upgrade those skills if we are to survive in the modern world. Let me put it that way.
Now, particularly referring to some of your early interactions. Now, when you came in the 80s, you were an initiator, a pioneer in a place like Syntec, in energy management, in the ECT. That was the energy committee that you served on. and you also at the time served on the International Association of Energy Economists. And some of the areas that you interacted in, such as fuel, gas, or hydropower, what particular things do you note now?
But in a sense, I mean, quite neutrally, as I said, the problems of governance in Sri Lanka have got much more difficult, and for good reason, because we have been through a very punishing war, and I think we should be very grateful for those who have actually brought that war to a successful close. But unfortunately, we haven't used now the post-war period to catch up, because there's a lot of catching up to do. Now, in the 80s, there was a better, more coordinated planning framework. I think the system is more politicized now, and in a sense, it is the blame should be spread equally among the politicians and the bureaucrats, because the politicians, by their very nature, want to interfere and ad hoc things because they want to make things work for their advantage.
I mean, that's happened constantly.
Absolutely.
That's been the bane of our development throughout history, with not just one particular government or regime or party. Whoever has been in power has always thought that they knew better than the actual experts. And this is where people like you must come in, and I'm glad that you're back in Sri Lanka. Yeah.
Now, I also put the blame to some extent on the experts and the administrative staff, because they have not stood firm. So you have now basically people who are more pliant in public service, who will not stand up and say, look, sir, this is a wrong act, and I will not, you know, I can't. So because of that, the political leadership perhaps is not getting the right advice, and therefore we are having this misgovernance.
Right. Tell me, let me break it up. Talk of the ECT, the Energy Committee that you served on. What's its status now? What is it doing now?
Well, unfortunately, the energy coordinating team, which set up the first plan for Sri Lanka and continued after I left, gradually became defunct. So the coordination in the energy sector has gone, and you now see some malontondu in the sense of differences between the petroleum ministry and the power ministry, and then so on. And the gas people.
Which is not healthy for.
Which is not healthy for us. The second point, of course, is that in the mid-80s, I also created something called the Sri Lanka Energy Managers Association, which is a professional body.
Right. What did that do? What's the difference between the ECT and that?
Well, basically, the ECT was a government body which came under the president, President Jayawardena, and so on. So it required political clout to continue, and when the ministers and others were disinterested, it declined. Whereas the Energy Managers Association is a professional body. It's a private body, but incorporated through Act of Parliament. Right. I made sure of that. Yeah. And it continues because all of the professionals, the senior managers in petroleum and electricity and the private sector belong to it, and they keep it going. Yeah. And the expertise is there, but they don't have the political clout. But the expertise is there, and they're protecting that.
Good. That's a good point. Now, we spoke earlier of your sustainomics triangle. There was a economic or a prosperity aspect. There was the social aspect, or the people. Then there was the enviro aspect, or the planet that we live on, the 3 Ps. We, at the moment, are facing obviously an energy crisis in Sri Lanka, and I'm sure that happens in every country. And we are at the moment grappling with several initiatives, like of saving electricity. Let's talk about electricity. You worked in the developed, or the so-called developed world, not that we necessarily agree with the definition, but you worked in other places of the globe, and now you're here. Give us your very direct comments on what you think we are doing wrong, how can we change it, how do we make the effort within your triangle, within your framework of conserving energy for the future?
Yeah. First, let me be very clear. I'm not an admirer of the Western world in a sense, because they have made a mess of it. If you look at the financial economic crisis, it is the Western countries, Europe and the US and so on, who are in decline. It is the BRICS, the emerging nations, the Chinas, the Brazils, the Indias and so on,
which
are emerging.
The so-called developed world. I mean, it is it is them themselves that call them developed and us undeveloped. So that
they're also capable of all other kinds of hypocrisy, including the hypocrisies of human rights and so on.
So subjecting ourselves to all of that.
Exactly. But pointing the finger at the other person, you have to be very careful, because 3 fingers point back at you. So just because the other fellow is bad doesn't mean that we should be worse. Right? And if you look at the triangle now, what is driving, not only in Sri Lanka but globally, the social values that are driving us are greed, selfishness, intolerance, violence, and so on. Whereas it should be other principles, for example, of altruism, even enlightened self-interest. Basically, it's saying if you do good to the other person will do good to you, so you will benefit. Those things are being suppressed. So because the social values are wrong, then the economic system is totally corrupted. So you have basically now the syndrome of debt and borrowing, that in the past, our ancestors believed in thrift. So they saved, and our grandparents saved so that we could live a better life. We have discovered the benefits of borrowing. So we are improving our life, not through saving, but by putting the burden on our children and grandchildren. So the whole economic system, which is supporting expanded consumption today, is very hollow. And then that leads to what I call the environmental debt, that we are eating up the environmental resources. We are already consuming more than the equivalent of the planet Earth, 1.5 times the value that the Earth can produce. So the corrupt social system has created an economic system which is completely out of kilter and is now destroying the environment, which in turn also undermines society. And Sri Lanka should be very careful not to fall into this hole, into this trap.
Talk to us for the sake of perhaps those viewers, very briefly, who may have missed last week's program. Your 2007 work that led to the Nobel Peace Prize. I want to set the platform to come to some Millennium Goals later, but the 2007 work that led to the award of the Nobel Peace Prize to you and several others, whilst you were chairing the Intergovernmental Committee, Vice Chair, Intergovernmental Committee. Talk to us a little bit about that work. What was it that led to it?
Chrismal, could I just say a little bit about Sri Lanka, which I couldn't say?
Please.
And that is, we have tremendous potential. I mean, from the economic side, I think we have the resources, human resources, which are most important, and the skills. From the social side, we have the social and human capital, the commitment now to peace and prosperity, if we can bring it together. And from the environmental side, we have a long tradition of respect for nature. We just have to bring those out so that we can mobilize not only the government, but also business and civil society. This is very important. We all leave things to government. No, you and I can make a difference. And we can actually build a very successful Sri Lanka if we want to.
Now, I want to bring you to that in our next segment, which is possibly, anyway. You are going to get your opportunity, as all our guests do, because they are picked from the creme de la creme of Sri Lankan professionals, and we always give our guests that last few minutes to give your message out, because these are going to be archived in Rupavahini for several years to come, and perhaps when all of us are no more, there will be a young Sri Lankan watching out there who may be the next Nobel laureate for Sri Lanka, and so there you are. But can I take you back to the Nobel work? What was it that led to the award of that?
Well, basically, again, luck, because in any given year, 300 people are nominated for Nobel Prizes, and the Nobel Committee has to pick something. Now, normally they pick a political thing. It's Gorbachev or some civil rights advocate or something like that. But in this case, they felt that climate change is something that's going to affect all of humanity, and these are people who have done something to bring this problem to the attention of the world, including Al Gore, who is not a scientist.
No.
That was dissemination, but the scientists, that's us, actually discovered the facts or dug out the facts. So it was that service to the well-being of humanity that brought this recognition.
How are we doing, in your frank opinion, with the sustainomic triangle in Sri Lanka? Can I bring you to it this way? A political scientist or a socio-politician, one of our guests previously, commented on this angle. Sri Lanka being a democracy, we are run by a constitution. We give our powers of governance to an elected government every so on and so forth. And then they go and exercise their rights of governance on our behalf. So as opposed to a direct or participatory democracy as was in Greece and Athens and all that, we have now elected representatives. It is through them that every year a budget is formulated, budget being an appropriation bill, an act of parliament, which basically decides how our resources for that year, here are unlimited wants of a population of a country, and these resources that we have, which are very few, must be allocated. And the best possible way of allocating that is called a budget for that year. How are we going to use our resources for this year? In your opinion, are our resources being managed well? If not, what better thing can we do? Even if we are, can we take some knowledge from somewhere else to make it better?
Well, you've posed your question more on the economic side, but I'll broaden it a little bit. I think all governments since independence have contributed to the present situation, which is not good, right? I mean, basically, you have a problem of budget deficits in the sense that we are living beyond our means, in the sense that the economic income revenues are not sufficient to meet the expenditures, and therefore the government has to print money, which causes inflation. Secondly, the external situation. We are again importing more than we can export, and that is why you have the rapid decline of the rupee relative to the dollar. It was artificially maintained, overvalued currency. We have the whole situation of debt, that we are constantly borrowing from the future, which means future generations will have to pay. And then we also have inefficiencies, that major corporations of government are running at enormous losses, and this cannot go on indefinitely. So when we talk about our resources being allocated rationally, basically if you stop all of this waste and also corruption, I must be very clear, then the question of allocation of resources becomes a minor part of the question. So first is, so much money is being wasted and through inefficiency and corruption that however well you allocate your resources, you're never going to come out of the hole. So that is the economic situation.
You tackle that first.
Yeah. But we also have the environmental side, that we have consistently now destroyed forest cover. There is land degradation in a big way. There is also water pollution in various areas, because you have unsustainable economic activities which are also being supported because of the political, socio-political system. So you come back again to the social side, that we are also destroying social capital, which is basically that the value system. What are we teaching young people? That you have to make a quick buck, that you have to be politically well connected, and then nothing matters. The laws, decency, good conduct, caring for others, ethics and so on are all gone overboard. Now, I have a very good story to tell you about social capital, which actually says that we have a very rich source of social capital. So basically, the picture I gave you is economic capital is eroding because of the wastage and corruption. The environmental capital, the natural capital, is being destroyed. And even the social capital is being undermined. But we can build up all three if we do it properly.
There you go. And how we're going to do it, and our millennium goals, development, consumption, and how global political leaders are handling the situation, how Sri Lanka is handling the situation, and also our last segment, Professor's words to the future Sri Lanka. That's all coming up in our next segment of Checkmate, so don't go away. Hello everyone, and welcome back to this, our last segment on our second day with Professor Mohan Munasinghe, and we have lots of interesting things to discuss with you, particularly with the areas of his interaction in Sri Lanka now. Having gone through that length and breadth of his experiences overseas, he's come back home finally, and he's doing a lot of work here, which we're going to talk about. But before that, Professor, talk to us a little bit about your the Millennium Goals, the development goals and the consumption goals, and you had a very interesting thought that global leaders were not necessarily the right people to tackle it, but you must perhaps target at a lower strata. Talk to us about it.
Well, basically, let's start with the second point first. Yeah. You're seeing meeting after meeting, these major meetings where global leaders go and take advantage of the photo op, but nothing happens. Right. Okay, so
can I just ask you, what are the Millennium Goals? Just very quickly.
Well, the Millennium Development Goals are a set of goals that were established in around the year 2000 to basically bring the poor out of poverty.
Right.
Right.
And the consumption goals?
Well, now the Millennium Consumption Goals is something that I have proposed in 2010 to complement the Millennium Development Goals. Yeah. And the reasons are the following. If you look at the consumption in the globe today, as I said earlier, we are consuming more than the planet can produce, 1.5 times more than the planet can safely produce. So we are eating into our natural capital. And this is an increasing trend. Secondly, of that consumption, of the 1.5 planets we are consuming, 85% of that is consumed by 20% of the richest people in the world. So the top 20% are consuming more than a planet's worth of resources. And at the same time, the Millennium Development Goals I talked to you about are promising 2 billion poor people, or we are going to raise you out of poverty. That just is not enough. It's like saying there are 100 people, there are only 10 loaves of bread, which is not enough, and we are going to feed another 200 people with the same amount. How are we going to do that? So Millennium Consumption Goals first says everybody has to have their basic needs met, which means a minimum amount of food, water, energy, and so on. And the second part says the rich have to gradually decrease their consumption. And we are proposing that in a way which is also win-win, because most of the affluent are over-consuming, they are sick, they are getting heart disease, they are obese, and so on and so forth. So by going to a healthy diet, healthier diet and lifestyles, you can greatly reduce overconsumption, but also wind up better. And